Did you know that Saint Faustina Kowalska, the chosen visionary of divine mercy, received a specific urgent warning about 3 animals that should never, under any circumstances, cross the threshold of a Christian home? These are not ordinary creatures. They are animals that, although appearing utterly harmless and insignificant, act as powerful spiritual keys that deliberately open doors to profound discord, severe spiritual sickness, and ultimately, a dangerous separation from God's grace. Few within the church or among the faithful truly know this deeply mystical and cautionary aspect of her life. Saint Faustina was not merely a recipient of the glorious celestial visions of Jesus, the King of Mercy, but she was also meticulously instructed by the Lord himself about the subtle, yet devastating spiritual dangers that constantly lurk and seek entry into our most sacred spaces, our homes. Amidst her profound ecstasies, her intense suffering and her intimate communion with heaven, the Lord revealed to her that there are specific creatures that function as living symbols, as active conduits of dark, insidious influences. Today, you will not only discover what these 3 symbolic animals are, but you will also understand precisely why Saint Faustina, with the clarity of a mystic, feared their presence so intensely. More importantly, you will learn the immediate, decisive action required if one has already managed to establish its subtle, corrupting presence in your house. And the most disturbing, the most alarming truth is that countless Christian women, devout in many ways, have unknowingly allowed these spiritual invaders to enter, completely unaware of the existential danger they represent to their families and their faith. If you believe with all your heart in the boundless power of the divine mercy, and if you desire an impenetrable spiritual protection for your family and your domestic church, I urge you to write immediately in the comments, "Jesus, I trust in you. Protect my home." This is your first act of faith and defense. Commit to staying with me until the very end of this message, because I have been entrusted to reveal the 3 exact, powerful words that Saint Faustina was commanded to pronounce every single night before sleep. These words were her spiritual seal, used to guard her soul and her entire surroundings against every form of spiritual invasion. These are simple words, yet they have protected thousands upon thousands of souls across centuries, and tragically, most modern devotees of the divine mercy remain completely unaware of their protective power. Honor this sacred, vital teaching. Click like now if you long for your home to be filled, not with anxiety, but with the perfect, unshakable peace of Christ. Subscribe to this channel if you are actively seeking the spiritual protection that only the infinite divine mercy can truly provide. The year was 1935. Saint Faustina was residing in Vilnius, fully engaged in her monumental mission to spread the urgent message of the divine mercy to a world desperately in need. What she received was not a comforting vision of light, but a stark, sobering warning about the invisible, vulnerable doors of the Christian home and the specific creatures that are designed to cross them to contaminate the peace and sanctity of a family. In her personal writings, which serve as the raw, unfiltered diary of her soul, Saint Faustina meticulously describes how the Lord revealed to her that there are specific symbols that function as active spiritual portals for evil. The first of these animals, which acts as the initial subtle herald of spiritual darkness, is one that moves with a deceptive, almost imperceptible slowness. Yet this creature is actively weaving a pervasive net of spiritual immobility and profound despair. Its very presence in the home, according to the saint's direct revelation, is a clear, unmistakable sign that spiritual laziness, or acedia, has begun its deadly work, effectively paralyzing the will to pray, to sacrifice, and to practice active charity. This animal, upon entering a house, does not merely bring its physical presence. It opens a wide, dangerous portal to lukewarmness, the spiritual state that Jesus himself declared to be the most feared and detested. What is this animal that Saint Faustina, with her profound spiritual insight, identified as the primary bearer of spiritual immobility and soul-destroying lukewarmness? And most critically, how can you immediately and effectively undo the destructive net it is silently weaving in your life and your home? The first animal that Saint Faustina identified in her mystical revelation as the bearer of spiritual lukewarmness and immobility is the snail. And when the saint mentions it, It is not with indifference, but with the solemnity of one who has seen the damage that slowness and lack of fervor can inflict upon the soul. The snail is no ordinary creature. Its movement is the very symbol of the spiritual laziness that creeps into the home. In St. Faustina's diary, she recounts how Jesus insisted on the urgency of conversion and action, but time is short and mercy awaits. The snail, with its inherent slowness, represents the dangerous procrastination of the spiritual life. While faith demands a firm and decisive step toward Christ, the snail moves by dragging its body, leaving a trail of slime that symbolizes the spiritual filth that accumulates through negligence. It is the living symbol of the inversion of the divine order of urgency. The snail does not merely represent slowness, it represents the inversion of the order of charity that God established. In the Bible, we are called to be fervent in spirit, to run the race of faith. The snail breaks this divine order. It is perpetually in a state of near stoppage, active only enough to survive, but never to truly flourish. And its presence near a Christian home, according to St. Faustina, indicates that something within that house has ceased to be under the burning fire of the Holy Spirit. The snail does not only bring slowness, it also brings what St. Faustina called the blindness of urgency. This is the progressive inability to see the necessity of daily prayer, of frequent confession, of the practice of the works of mercy. It is when a Christian family begins to normalize spiritual mediocrity, when faults that once caused remorse are now justified with excuses like, "I don't have time," or "God is good and forgives me." When the snail establishes itself, the spiritual consequences begin to manifest in subtle, yet devastating ways. Families who have allowed the presence of this symbol in their homes report similar patterns: a progressive decrease in the practice of family prayer, as if something invisible were blocking the desire to draw near to God. Sunday Mass becomes optional, Bible reading is abandoned, and the desire to serve one's neighbor grows cold. Saint Faustina warns that the snail does not act alone. It is the first animal that paves the way for the others. For once the spiritual lukewarmness that the snail represents settles into a home, the doors are left ajar for other creatures of negative influence to also find entry. Therefore, in the tradition of divine mercy, there is a clear teaching: never allow the snail to nest near the house. Never let spiritual laziness be justified. Never ignore the feeling that the life of faith has become heavy and tasteless, because its presence is not a natural coincidence. It is a spiritual invitation that someone unknowingly has extended. And if any Christian woman has felt that her life of faith has become slow, heavy, and lacking in fervor, she must understand that she is not facing a simple, natural occurrence. She is facing a spiritual sign that requires immediate attention. She is facing the first warning that her home needs to be purified, consecrated, and sealed under the protection of divine mercy. To combat the snail, St. Faustina teaches us the path of immediate action. It is not enough to merely desire to be better. It is necessary to rise up and act. Lukewarmness is fought with fervor. The antidote to the snail is the practice of the works of mercy, both corporal and spiritual. It is necessary to fill the home with the sound of prayer, with the light of charity, and with the fire of the love of God. But this first animal is not the most dangerous. There is one that St. Faustina feared more than any other, one whose presence in the home does not only bring slowness, but literally opens doors to forces that destroy from within, that moves in the darkness, and brings with it the blindness of the soul. The second animal that St. Faustina identified in her mystical revelation is one that causes a visceral fear in almost all women, an animal that does not announce its arrival, that enters without making a sound, without warning, and that is often only discovered when it has already established its presence in the home. We are talking about the second animal that St. Faustina identified in her mystical revelation is the bat. If the snail represents the creeping lukewarmness, the bat represents the silent invasion of darkness, the contamination that occurs without anyone noticing. It is the animal of the shadows par excellence. Not only does it live in darkness, but it dwells in caves, in places where light never reaches. And when this animal leaves its natural habitat to enter a house, it brings with it that same spiritual darkness. In the biblical tradition, caves and dark places are always associated with separation from God. The bat lives in contradiction with the divine order, for it not only prefers darkness, it needs it to survive. Its body is designed to flee from the light. Its eyes cannot bear the sun, and its entry into a Christian home, according to Saint Faustina, is a sign that something in that house has ceased to be illuminated by the presence of God. Saint Faustina was extremely precise in her mystical observations. She noted that families where bats established themselves began to experience what she called the blindness of the soul. What is the blindness of the soul? It is the progressive inability to see spiritual truth. It is when a Christian family begins to normalize sin, when faults that once caused remorse are now justified, when prayer ceases to be a priority because there is no time, when Sunday Mass becomes optional, when conversations about God disappear from the family table, when children begin to drift away from the faith and parents feel no urgency to correct the course. All this, Saint Faustina attributed to the influence of the bat in the home. But just as the bat cannot see in the light, families under its influence lose the ability to see spiritual light. They begin to live in a darkness that no longer bothers them, which even begins to seem normal. And there is more. The bat not only brings spiritual blindness, it also brings what Saint Faustina called the contagion of the impure. In the tradition of the Old Testament, the bat is considered an unclean animal. Its mere presence required ritual purification. The bat feeds on blood or dead insects, lives among excrement in caves. It carries diseases. It is essentially an animal associated with decomposition and death. When the bat enters a Christian home and establishes its presence, it brings with it that same spiritual contamination. Families begin to experience recurrent illnesses without clear medical explanation, allergies that appear out of nowhere, respiratory problems, constant headaches, chronic fatigue, and, most disturbingly, a feeling of heaviness which does not disappear even with physical cleaning. Saint Faustina warned that if they ever found a bat inside the convent, they should act immediately. It was not enough to just remove it. It was necessary to bless the space where it had been. It was necessary to pray. It was necessary to use holy water in the corners. It was necessary to close the entrances through which it had entered and consecrate them with blessed oil. For the bat is the silent invader. It is the one that enters without anyone seeing it. It is the one that hides in places no one checks. It is the one that remains hidden during the day and only comes out when everyone is asleep. And that same furtive nature is what makes it such a grave spiritual danger. Many Christian women have bats in their attics and do not know it. They have heard strange noises at night but have ignored them. They have noticed dark stains on the walls but have not investigated. They have felt a strange odor in certain rooms but have attributed it to humidity. And meanwhile, the presence of the bat continues to do its silent work, continues to obscure the spiritual vision of that family, continues to contaminate the sacred environment that every Christian home should have. And if you think the bat is disturbing, wait until you know the third animal. For the third does not only bring slowness or blindness, the third brings something that destroys families from within, something that Saint Faustina described as the poison that is woven in silence. And once it enters, it is almost impossible to detect until the damage is already done. The third animal that Saint Faustina identified in her revelation is one that almost every woman has seen in her house at least once. One that seems harmless because of its size, one that many people even tolerate because it eats mosquitoes or because it does no harm. But Saint Faustina warned with absolute firmness that this animal must never be allowed in a Christian home. We are talking about the third animal that Saint Faustina identified in her revelation is the spider. If the snail brings lukewarmness and the bat brings spiritual blindness, the spider brings something devastating: discord, division, the entanglement of family relationships until peace becomes impossible. For the spider does not act with violence, it acts by weaving. The spider weaves its web in the corners, in the places that are not cleaned, in silence. And its web, even if it seems fragile, is a deadly trap. It symbolizes the net of misunderstandings, gossip, resentments, and unspoken words that are woven into the home, a net that traps communication, trust, and love. Saint Faustina, in her deep inner life, understood that the enemy does not always attack with great sins, but with small divisions that, accumulated, destroy family unity. The spider represents the poison that is woven in silence. Once it enters, it is almost impossible to detect until the damage is already done. The spider does not only weave discord, it also represents lies and manipulation. The spider's web is an illusion of security for the insect that falls into it. In the same way, the spiritual spider weaves a net of lies and justifications that prevent family members from seeing the truth of their hearts and the necessity of mercy. When the spider settles in, the consequences are evident. Conversations flow with difficulty, fights increase drastically, laughter disappears, family meals become tense, and family members isolate themselves in their own worlds. The spider web of division that the spider has woven becomes so dense that the light of Christ has difficulty penetrating. Saint Faustina warned that the spider is the animal that feeds on the lack of forgiveness and constant criticism. Every harsh word, every judgment, every unreleased resentment is a thread that strengthens the spiritual spiderweb in the home. Now that you know the three animals that should never enter a Christian home, the snail, the bat, and the spider, it is crucial to understand how they find entry. For these animals do not enter by chance. There is always an open door, a breach in the spiritual defense that allows them access. Saint Faustina, with her mystical clarity, identified 7 invisible ways through which these animals find entry. 7 breaches that every Christian woman must seal immediately to protect her family. The first is the lack of consecration of the home, which means not having surrendered the house to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The second are unblessed objects, which means having images, books, or ornaments in the house that have not been blessed or that have a dubious origin. The third are words of curse, which means uttering words of anger, judgment, or resentment against family members or against oneself. The fourth is unconfessed grave sin, which means maintaining a mortal sin in the soul without seeking the sacrament of reconciliation. The fifth is negligence in family prayer, which means not having a daily moment of prayer as a family. The sixth are visitors with negative spiritual burdens, which means allowing entry to people who bring with them a spirit of discord, criticism, or envy. The seventh is spiritually toxic entertainment, which means consuming movies, series, music, or games that promote violence, immorality, or occultism. Each of these forms represents a breach in your spiritual defense that must be sealed. But how to seal these doors? How to undo the spiderweb of discord? How to regain spiritual vision and lost fervor? Saint Faustina, with her immense trust in mercy, left us a simple but powerful ritual of purification that any Christian can perform in her home. A ritual that begins with immediate action and absolute trust in Jesus. You have heard the documented testimonies of families who suffered the devastating consequences of ignoring these warnings. But you have also heard the stories of restoration of families who were on the verge of collapse and were saved when they finally took the spiritual warfare for their homes seriously. These stories are not exceptional. They can be your story. They can be the testimony that you yourself will give in the future. Now that you know the 3 animals and the 7 invisible ways through which they find entry, it is fundamental that you identify the 5 daily mistakes that even the most devout women commit. Mistakes that seem insignificant, but which, when accumulated, create the perfect conditions for spiritual invasion. First mistake: negligence in daily consecration. Many women consecrated their home once, but forgot that protection is an act of continuous vigilance. The enemy does not rest. Consecration must be renewed, even if only with a brief aspiration upon waking and before going to sleep. Forgetting this spiritual maintenance is like leaving the front door wide open. Second mistake: minimizing the power of negative words. The home is a temple, and words are either incense or poison. The mistake is believing that complaints, constant criticism, judgments, or words of curse spoken in anger are harmless. Saint Faustina reminds us that language is a creative power. Every negative word is a brick that builds a wall between family members and the mercy of God. Third mistake: lack of vigilance over entertainment. The mistake is thinking that what enters through the eyes and ears does not affect the spirit. Spiritually toxic entertainment, movies, series, music, games, is one of the most subtle and dangerous ways to open the doors to the snail, the bat, and the spider. It is a direct invitation to darkness and discord. The devout woman must be the guardian of the purity of her home. Fourth mistake: laziness in spiritual cleansing, confession. The mistake is postponing confession, believing that venial sins are not so serious or that mortal sin can wait. Saint Faustina teaches us that confession is the tribunal of mercy, the only place where the soul is washed and restored. An unconfessed soul is an easy target for the enemy. The snail feeds on this postponement. Fifth mistake: confusing physical cleaning with spiritual cleaning. The mistake is believing that a physically clean and tidy home is automatically a protected home. Physical cleaning is important, but it does not replace spiritual cleaning. It is necessary to clean the corners with holy water, anoint the entrances with blessed oil, and use sacramentals as protective shields. An impeccable home, but without prayer, is a fortress without soldiers. And most importantly, you know how to correct them. You know that it is not complicated, that it does not require extraordinary resources. It only requires awareness, vigilance, and decisive action. You have the ritual of purification that Saint Faustina taught, a simple but powerful ritual that any Christian can perform in her home. This ritual is the answer to the silent invasion of the three animals. It is the way to seal the 7 breaches and correct the 5 mistakes. It is the immediate action that Jesus expects from you. Are you ready to know the ritual of purification that Saint Faustina left us to restore the peace and protection of divine mercy in your home? Saint Faustina, knowing the natural anxiety of the soul seeking peace, taught something wonderful. God always confirms when a home has been restored under the protection of His mercy. He always gives clear and unequivocal signs, but before seeing the signs, it is necessary to act. The purification ritual of Saint Faustina. This ritual is simple but powerful, and is based on absolute trust in Jesus. The first phase is physical and spiritual cleaning. Start with a deep cleaning of the house. Get rid of any object that you know does not please God or that has a dubious origin. While cleaning, pray the Rosary or the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, asking Jesus to spiritually cleanse every corner. The second phase is the use of holy water and sacramentals. Use holy water at every entrance to the house, such as doors and windows. Place crucifixes, images of Jesus of Divine Mercy, and the Virgin Mary in visible places. The scapula, the miraculous medal, and the cross of Saint Benedict are powerful shields. The third phase is the consecration of the home. Consecrate your home to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This is an act of total surrender, recognizing Jesus as King and Protector of your house. The fourth phase is the commitment to daily prayer. Establish family prayer as a permanent practice. The recitation of the Rosary, or the Chaplet of Divine Mercy as a family, is the strongest shield against spiritual invasion. Once the ritual is performed, God's protection is manifested through 6 signs that confirm that your home has been restored under the protection of the Most High. The first sign is the inexplicable peace. Not a superficial peace, but a deep peace that permeates the entire house. The atmosphere feels different, lighter, brighter. It is the presence of the Holy Spirit filling the space that was previously occupied by darkness. The second sign is restored dreams. Nightmares cease. Anxious awakenings in the middle of the night disappear. Children sleep peacefully all night. The third sign is the restoration of family communication. Conversations flow again. Fights decrease drastically. There is laughter in the house, there are spontaneous hugs. The spiderweb of division that the spider had woven is completely undone. The fourth sign is the return of the desire to pray. Prayer ceases to be an obligation and becomes a natural desire. The Bible is opened more often. Sunday Mass becomes a priority. The fifth sign is restored health. Mysterious illnesses disappear. Chronic pains without medical explanation cease. Vital energy returns to every member of the family. The sixth sign is the physical absence of the 3 animals. The snail, the bat, and the spider decrease drastically or disappear entirely. It is as if these animals know they are no longer welcome and seek other places. Saint Faustina taught that these 6 signs usually manifest in the first days or weeks after the purification ritual. And when you experience them, you can have absolute certainty that your home is once again under the protection of divine mercy, that the doors have been closed, that the enemy has been expelled, and that your family is safe. But this protection is neither automatic nor permanent without maintenance. It requires continuous vigilance. It requires daily prayer. It requires active sacramental life. It requires that you do not repeat the mistakes that opened the doors originally, because a protected home is a vigilant home. We have reached the end of this revelation that St. Faustina Kowalska received. Now you know the three animals that should never enter a Christian home: the snail, the bat, and the spider. You also know the 7 invisible ways through which these animals find entry and the 5 daily mistakes you must avoid. But all this knowledge is useless if it does not turn into action. You can listen to this teaching. You can agree with every word. You can recognize that your home needs this purification. But if you do not act, nothing will change. And now, the promise kept. The 3 exact words that St. Faustina pronounced every night before sleeping to seal her soul and her surroundings against all spiritual invasion. 3 words that have protected countless souls for centuries. 3 words that you must make your own from today. We have reached the end of this revelation that St. Faustina Kowalska received, a message that continues to be as relevant and necessary today as it was then, because the spiritual dangers that lurk in our homes have not changed. The enemy's tactics remain the same, and the need for divine protection is more urgent than ever in these times when faith is under constant attack. Now you know the 3 animals that should never enter a Christian home: the snail that brings spiritual lukewarmness, the bat that brings the blindness of the soul, and the spider that weaves discord and division. They are not mere animals. They are living symbols of spiritual realities. They are signs of open doors that must be closed immediately. You also know the 7 invisible ways through which these animals find entry, and the 5 daily mistakes you must avoid. Each of these forms represents a breach in your spiritual defense that must be sealed. But all this knowledge is useless if it does not turn into action. Saint Faustina was a woman of action. She did not just contemplate God, she also worked tirelessly to establish his kingdom of mercy on earth. She understood something fundamental, that the great spiritual battles are won or lost in the small decisions of everyday life, and she left a promise, a beautiful and powerful promise for every Christian woman who takes the spiritual protection of her family seriously. Saint Faustina promised that every home consecrated to the Sacred Heart, every home where daily prayer is maintained, every home where the spiritual doors are guarded, is a home where Jesus himself dwells as King and Protector. And where he dwells, the enemy cannot remain. This promise has been proven by millions of families, families that were destroyed and were restored, families that were under attack and found refuge. All have something in common. They took action. Your home can be a sanctuary, a place where your children grow up spiritually safe, a place where your marriage flourishes, a place where the presence of God is so real that everyone feels it. A place where the 3 forbidden animals will never find entry again. But it all begins with a decision you must make today. Start this very afternoon by performing the purification ritual. Clean your house physically and spiritually. Seal the doors with holy water. Consecrate your home to the Sacred Heart and establish family prayer as a permanent practice. These are simple steps, but their impact will be eternal. And now, the final revelation. The 3 exact words that St. Faustina pronounced every night before sleeping to seal her soul and her surroundings against all spiritual invasion. 3 words that have protected countless souls for centuries. 3 words that you must make your own from today. Jesus, I trust in you. As simple as that, as powerful as that, it is the greatest act of faith you can make. It is the key that closes all doors to the enemy and opens wide the door to divine mercy. If this message has touched your heart, if you recognize that your home needs this protection, show it by subscribing to this channel, where we will continue to share the deep teachings of the saints. Like this video if you feel that this revelation arrived at the exact moment your family needed it. And share this video with every Christian woman you know, because there are thousands of homes under spiritual attack whose inhabitants do not even know why everything is going wrong. May the Lord bless your home. May the Sacred Heart of Jesus reign in your family, and may the 3 forbidden animals never cross your door again. Amen.